We can do it.
Hello, I'm Derek Farrell and I'm here today with Rachel Ward.
Hello, hi. I'm Rachel Ward. I'm the author of thrillers for young adults, including Numbers, which was published in 2009 and sold to 26 countries and is optioned for TV at the moment. I also write a cozy crime series called The Anton B Mysteries, which is set in and around a supermarket in a small town. And the most recent one, Expiry Date, was published in June.
And I'm Derek Farrell. I'm the author of 5 Danny Bird mysteries: Death of a Diva, Death of a Nobody, Death of a Devil, Death of an Angel, and the novella Death of a Sinner. And I'm so pleased, Rachel, that you went first, because I had a nightmare where I was like, expiry date or expiry date? And I was like, And we're here today to talk about cozy crime and to try to lift the veil on the fact that whilst it's often seen as being slightly fluffy, it can actually be a really good carrier for some of the darker themes in crime novels. So,
Yeah.
Rachel, you gave us a quick insight there into your trajectory from the beginning till now. What drew you? Because obviously you are very, very successful as a young adult author. What drew you to crime, and specifically to cozy crime?
Yeah, well, my young adult stuff is very, very dark. And I had 5 thrillers published and I was waiting for edits on a 6th and sort of twiddling my thumbs. And I had a character in my head, that of B, who's my supermarket checkout worker, who's very resourceful and very bright, and she's quite actually happy in her work and she makes the best of things. She's a really lovely character, and I had her in my head. I thought she might be a character in a young adult book, actually, because she's 19, 20-ish. And I just thought, well, while I'm waiting, I'll start playing with this character and this idea. I thought she would get involved in mysteries because she observes things, and you know, all the world goes through a supermarket, so there's lots to observe and listen to and all that stuff. So I just started writing her, and it was bizarre. It just flowed really quickly and took on its own character really quickly. And it wasn't a conscious thing. It was just, I think, coming all from her, that she dictated the nature of the book, really. And so I read a lot of crime. I mostly read crime. And I was just so excited to try and write a crime book. And then it turned into a sort of gentle, it's got a dark thread running through it, but it's a gentle world with a nice cast of characters, and they care about each other and they look after each other, and they live in an English market town, a bit like the town I used to work in. I worked in for 10 years, so I really drew on that and the idea of a community.
Yeah.
And it kind of just happened. And I was writing it chapter by chapter because my husband was very ill at that point, and I was sending him chapters to his Kindle while he was at home, and then he had to go and live in hospital, and I would send him chapters there, and then the next time I came to visit, we'd talk about how the plot was going and what was going to happen. And it just turned into a lovely thing that we did, and it was something else to talk about and think about other than his health. It was just a distraction, really.
That's a beautiful idea. It's almost a Scheherazade idea.
It was, yes, it was. It was a lovely thing, a lovely thing. And then he had his heart transplant and was very, very poorly. So I carried on reading him chapters in intensive care, actually. He couldn't escape. The chapter, good, here we are. And then I ended up finishing the book, and I thought, you know, both of us enjoyed writing it and listening to it so much. I thought I'd try and find a publisher. So that's the sort of, and also it is crime, but at that point, we both needed something lighter and more comforting. And I found ever since then, I don't really want to dwell in very dark places, because you spend so long writing a book. And because we've been through dark times, actually I want to dwell in lighter places when I write now. So I think that's what's happened to me. So how did you come across Danny Bird? Was it him, or was it the setting that came to you first?
It was him, and it was my 40th birthday. Some friends of mine got me an online writing course, and I was working on the online writing course, and my boyfriend at the time, fiance at the time, husband now, had got me a physical writing course, which was in the Groucho Club in London, and I was like so over the moon. Like, I'm going to Groucho for 4 hours. I think it was about 4 hours a week every Saturday for about 8 weeks, and it was a fantastic course. But I was writing really slightly dark historical stuff at that time, and that's what I wanted to do. I had no desire to write a Danny Bird mystery, but they did an exercise, and the exercise was one of those ones I think anyone who's done creative writing classes will have done, where they get you to create a character and interrogate the character and understand what the character loves and hates and fears, and then you basically destroy the character's life as a way of seeing what will happen to them when you've taken away all the things that they value. And that was an exercise that I thought, okay, I've done that. I've created this character. He's fun. I liked him, but he doesn't fit into my dark, violent, historical ones. Put him to one side. For the rest of the 8 weeks, I had people coming up to me every break time and saying, I want to know more about him. Why? I'd go for a drink with him. Why aren't you writing him? And it was like, well, why aren't I writing him? And then it really was an exercise. I did the original exercise, then I thought, well, what would happen to him next? And created that. And I'm sure all writers are the same. You don't realize until afterwards how much you've absorbed over time. Places and characters and settings and atmospheres that you just have. And as soon as you start, if the magic works, they're there. So the pub was a pub I used to go to in the very early 90s. Every Friday we'd go to this pub, and it was a gay pub in South London, but it had been originally built in the 20s. My one goes back to the 1800s, so mine's older. But this pub was originally built in the 20s, and nothing had changed. Literally, when it became a gay pub, all they did was put a glitter ball in one corner. And
that's it. That'll do.
The extent of the refurb. And I love that whole idea that these places exist, and just like your supermarket in a market town, over time, the world runs through them. So I had Danny, who was this everyman who's basically, he's lost his job, he's lost his relationship, he's lost his home, he's back sleeping in his bunk bed that he last slept in his teenage years at his parents' flat in the Elephant and Castle. And then that character was there. And then the setting came very quickly because, again, South London, just over the river between Borough and Southwark, you've got all human life. On one side of the river, you've got the city with billionaires and all of the rest of that going on, and the financial heart. On this side of the river, it becomes progressively more working class as you go on. But already what's happening when I started writing it was gentrification was coming in. So you had, working class council estates right next to billion-dollar apartment blocks. And I was like, yeah, this wasn't intended to be a cozy, because in my mind cozies they didn't take place in the middle of a big city with all these people going on. But
exactly.
Once you realize the common theme with cozies is the community and the sense of a real atmosphere of people working together for or against something, it's so
I think that's what it is. I think a lot of people think it's the country house or the English village or whatever, isn't it? But actually there's so much more to it now, isn't there? I mean, maybe cozy crime is a slightly uneasy term because people have those assumptions, But I think what we write is very contemporary, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it has that idea of community, and they're different sorts of communities, but that's what it has in common, I think.
And I mean, I think the definition that they often give is, in a cozy crime, the violence is minimized. There's no sex and there is no profanity. Well, mine have profanity. As do yours.
A little bit of sex in mine. Whoops. Yeah. A lot of stuff happens off screen, doesn't it? And you don't sort of write about it directly. But it's also having sort of amateur detectives, isn't it? So it's not police focused. It's these other people who have got drawn into solving mysteries and solving crime.
That's absolutely true, and I love that whole idea. But what are your thoughts on the fact that being amateurs, particularly nowadays, obviously things get more complicated and more limited. What's the most freeing thing about Ant and Bee being amateurs versus the challenges it creates?
Well, as a writer, it's easier because I don't need to know all the police techie stuff and all the police jargon and procedures. I can just imagine what it would be like for me if I was Bee or I was Ant. And I'm quite nosy anyway. So I mean, I've got 2 dogs and I walk them round the fields and round the canal most days very early. And I sometimes find, because I'm the first person out, I find things. So I've found a stolen. Not yet. I'm quite worried about that. I really don't want to find a body in the canal. I sometimes am quite paranoid about it. I found a stolen taxi in the canal once. It was exciting. I looked really carefully to see there wasn't anybody in it. I felt really sick, but there wasn't.
But wait, I think as writers, we need to be careful about the word. When you say found, it wasn't particularly hidden, was it?
Well, no. Partly submerged.
That's awesome.
I was the first person there. But anyway, because then it's not too much of a stretch to then imagine that somebody just ordinary finds something and wants to investigate.
Yeah.
And then you can draw in helpers, can't you? So you draw in the police. They're not completely excluded from our books. So they come in when they're useful. And people like journalists and whatever, they're also useful, aren't they, as sources of information?
I love how Bee is such a wonderful character. She's, like you say, she's everything you said. She's bright and she's intelligent, but she's got a vulnerability that I'm really drawn to. But then she can switch off that vulnerability, and when she needs to use that, she's got a sort of a tame police officer who she can bring in and sort of he always says too much before he goes, of course I'm not supposed to be telling you this.
Yes, I mean, I think you kind of have to suspend your disbelief a bit with my books, but I mean, if you just buy into the concept of a crime solving checkout girl, then you do, once you're there, you just go with it. But draw in useful people, and because you've got a lovely cast of characters, and I love the way that Danny, at the beginning of the first book, everything's gone wrong, and actually for him the stakes are quite high in making this pub a goer, isn't it? Because he's lost everything, hasn't he? So he needs these people, doesn't he? And he needs it to work.
But like you, I'm a big fan of that story of the Marathon Man, when they were filming the Marathon Man, and Dustin Hoffman and Laurence Olivier, and Hoffman was supposed to be a marathon runner. So they're waiting to film one day, and there's no sign of Hoffman, and eventually he arrives gasping and wheezing, and in this particular scene, he's come in from training and he's soaked in sweat, and Laurence Olivier goes, "Where have you been?" And Dustin Hoffman says, "I've been running to get the energy up." And Laurence Olivier just looks at me and goes, "My dear boy, have you never thought of acting?" And it's the same with, because I'm working on the new book at the moment, I've got this stuck next to me on my printer.
Oh, what's that? Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's what it's all about.
If in doubt, make it up, because you can come back and fact check it later. But absolutely, you don't need to get bogged down in the minutiae of, because I've got some police contacts, and if I'm writing a police character, I have a huge risk that I'll get, oh, we're not allowed to do that, or we wouldn't do that. And then I have to spend time explaining how, although we're not allowed to do that, we did do that.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way I write too. I just write the story and worry about the facts afterwards. And there's not, you know, and even if you get some things wrong, I don't think it matters too much in this sort of book, actually, because I think it's more about the story and wanting things to work out in the end. And I'm hoping that readers are fairly forgiving when maybe things aren't particularly accurate or believable.
I've loved all three of yours, and there's not been one single point
Thank
where I've
you.
gone, oh, that wouldn't happen. Because you're right, there's an authentic emotional core there. And when you're in the feeling, quite frankly, if there is something in there that wouldn't happen and someone spots it, these are probably not the books for them, because they're analyzing too closely. You get into these types of books, and it's the emotions of the characters very often that you're following.
Yes, actually, yeah. I'm such a slow learner. I've only realised recently that that's what I want to write, is emotional books, but not necessarily, you know, gushing emotional books, but books that sort of hook you in, so you really care about the characters. And it's funny. I just realised that whatever genre I write in, I actually want them to be emotional books, and so that you really feel something at the end. Perhaps I should have tweaked that a bit earlier.
I mean, that's the brilliant thing about writing, isn't it? Is that even you, as an established author, still every day uncover things. It's almost it's a combination of creativity outwards onto the page and self-analysis inwards, thinking, why have I done that? Why, you know, what's happening? And I think I find that absolutely fascinating, is the fact that...
Well, it is. Quite often, I mean, now that, you know, we're writing these crime books, we know what sort of books we're writing, but quite often you write something and you don't know what sort of thing you're writing. I mean, my very first book, Numbers, I got to the end of that and thought, well, absolutely, yeah, option for TV being developed. I got to the end of that and read it through and thought, oh my God, I've written a love story. And then my publisher read it and went, well, you've written a thriller, but it needs to be a bit more thrilling. And I went, oh, I thought it was a love story. So you don't necessarily know, do you, what's in your book and what could be brought out. It's a funny old business, and you're constantly learning stuff about yourself.
So you meant, I mean, we've been talking about the fact that there's community and the sort of the darkness of the world isn't necessarily the focus. But I mean, your books have had stalking, domestic abuse. There's some really dark themes in there. And I guess and in mine, I've had matricide, I've had bodies uncovered from behind pub walls, I've had gentrification and financial skullduggery. And I guess the question I was going to ask you was, how do you think the cozy form can, you know, when we bring that level of darkness in, do you think it works better than something which is sold ostensibly as a very dark, gritty, bleak thriller? I.e., do we effectively creep the darkness up on our readers?
Well, I think we do, but our readers aren't living in a vacuum, are they? I mean, our readers are probably experiencing some of the things that our characters do, or, you know, or at least know people who are suffering domestic violence or whatever. And so I like rooting the books very much in the real world with real issues, but not sort of disturbing people too much. Balancing, it's a balance, isn't it? I mean, they're real issues, and I want people to understand, how real and how upsetting they are and the effects of those things.
Yep.
But I don't want them going to sleep having nightmares. So you can have, I think you can have very dark threads actually, as long as any gratuitous stuff is off screen.
Yeah.
And as long as you then balance it out, you have some sort of comedy or lighter threads going through, or you have a bit of banter which makes you smile, and then you sort of, you can just breathe a bit before it then gets serious again. It's about finding the balance, isn't it, somehow? And also you need a good ending where loose ends are tied up, and even though you may have taken your reader on a bit of a dark journey, actually the ending feels like a hug. I think that's what you want, really.
I know that. The ending feels like a hug. Yeah, I like that. I love it. And I think you're right. I think actually very often cozies are closer to real life, or closer to the real life of most of our readers than some of those far, far darker things. Because you're right. I mean, there are people whose lives consist of nothing but darkness and violence and danger. But they're thankfully often in the minority, whereas when you look at the vast majority of readers, there are these peaks and troughs. They do feel anxious and nervous about things. There is a degree of threat, but there is also, as you say, time spent with family and loved ones and laughing. And I remember a few years ago doing a podcast where they asked about the humor in my books. And I was like, well, that has always thrown me right from the beginning when people said they were funny, because I was like, but I'm not writing comedy. And then I realized it's like, well, it's just an instinctive balance. It's a yin yang thing. If I'm writing about a murder, it just felt instinctive that you've got to throw some light in there. You've got to have some comedy. You've got to have some moments that will sort of remove some of that darkness.
But it's also the real way people talk to each other. We do try and make each other laugh, don't we?
Yeah.
And especially in workplaces, both of our books are set in workplaces, aren't they? And people do gel, don't they, by having a bit of a laugh with their co-workers. It's just the way, it's the glue that sort of sticks things together, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. We're social creatures. If we didn't do that, you'd go mad, because all you'd have all day would be unremitting gloominess.
Yes, yeah. Just me and my dogs going mad.
So I've got a question then, which is competition. So we're talking about the fact that the supermarket cost save, which is a wonderful amalgam of, I was like, oh, I know it. Oh no, that's not the one I think it is. The lawyers have been in touch. It's not the one you think. And the Mark, which is the pub in mine. How many people have died in yours so far?
Oh gosh, that my books aren't littered with bodies, but they're probably two bodies a book, really.
Okay.
Yeah, so for quite a small area, we're up to 6 probably, and whoops, yes, it's tricky, isn't it? How many bodies have you had in your pub?
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like a euphemism, but we won't go there. I think I'm about 3 per book, so it's up to about 15. They're not all, but like you say though, they're not all in the pub. The first one was in the pub. There's one in the pub, and then one at a wake, and then I can't remember where the third one. Oh well, one in the pub. So yeah, they're not all in the pub, but it is that moment when you think any normal person who was continuously tripping over bodies, the police would be paying a lot of attention to them.
Yes, yes. So how do you tackle that then? How do you keep a series going without it becoming, just ridiculous, tripping over bodies all over the place?
I think you nailed it earlier. The fact is, it is unrealistic, but it's fiction, and the readers have bought the book because they want to escape into a world where there are internal rules, and one of the internal rules is, there's going to be bodies, and I have had. I mean, I've had one of the characters basically say, "We don't have." He's got a really miserable she's now the bar manager, but she starts off as a barmaid, and she's the worst suited person for that job in the world because she basically hates humanity. And as she's cleaning it one day, she says, "Well, we don't have regulars in this pub. We just have potential victims." And then there's another line where they say something like, "This place is like Midsummer with IPA on tap." So I've got around it by not pretending that it's not there. The reality is, you know, I think both of us know, as you said earlier, our readers aren't living in a vacuum. They're smart people. And so if you try to pretend that this is never raised, and I've had a couple of times Danny gets yanked in by the rozzers, as they say in the book. And of course, that's always the first thing they say is "you again." So yeah, I think it's unlikely, but as long as you don't try to pretend that it's absolutely perfectly normal. I've never had anybody. I have had a couple of reviews say, you know, this pub is basically ground zero for murder in South London, and I'm like, So how have you managed to? Because you've got, as you say, it's a small country town. I mean, do you worry that people will think this is unrealistic, or do you just go ahead with it?
I think I've not got to the point yet when I'm worried about it. I mean, I think there's only so many bodies you can have in an actual supermarket, but it's in the town, so it's, you know, there are environs, and also you can have historical corpses, can't you? So it doesn't have to be all present day. Things can turn up from the past, and I was pretty nasty and dead stock and picked on animals as well as people, so which I probably shouldn't have done. I think there are ways of doing it, aren't there? There are ways and ways. And again, you know, if your readers like the characters and they like reading a crime book, that's what they're looking for. So
I had one other question I wanted to ask you, if you don't mind, which is, when you look at the novel so far, you've got Ant and B, and I not only do I love B, but I love Ant. I love the fact that Ant, his progress, he's essentially homeless and sort of couch surfing at the moment. And again, quite a dark social comment on there. It's, you know, he's not a nice, happy-go-lucky young man who just drifts through life. He's facing some real challenges, and his dad's in prison, and his mum's moved on, and I love him. But you've got Queenie, and you've got Dot, and you've got all the characters in the supermarket. How do you keep track during a book and during the course of them of where these characters are?
Oh, I'm so bad. I'm so bad at it. I don't keep track. It's all in my head. I don't write notes. I don't have index cards. I forget people's names, you know, and change names halfway through the book. I'm so bad at it. And oh dear, I wish I was organised. But I do have a fairly strong picture of the characters, and I just keep it all in my head, which it's not the way to go, is it?
It's amazing. Because over the course of the 3 books already, these characters and their love lives, and the fact that someone's gone out with somebody else and then had a fling with, they're so realistic and they're so fresh. And it's part of what I love in a cozy series, is not just the crime and the protagonists, but those sort of secondary characters. And I'm so glad you said that. In fact, I think that should be a tagline. Rachel Ward, I'm so disorganized.
I am. But that's, you know, that's the sort of thing you can check through once you've got a first draft down, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the sort.
But I'm the same. The number of times I sit here with all these beside me and go, oh, now what was she called?
Yes. Yeah, me too.
I've got about 18 spreadsheets. Every time I say, right, I'll do it. I'll spend the day doing a spreadsheet and putting every character that's ever been. And then I lose the will to live by lunchtime.
Yes. Well, you just do what you do, don't you, and hope for the best.
That's another tagline. Do it. That is basically the mantra of every writer that has ever been.
Yeah.
So what are you working on now? What's next?
I have just finished a standalone. I don't even know what to call it. Cozy thriller. I don't know. Anyway, it's a standalone.
Department's job. They'll figure that out.
So I'll be looking for a home for that.
Okay.
And then I'm wondering what to do next. I've got a plot up my sleeve for another Anton B.
Yeah.
So I need to have that discussion with the publisher. We'll see. And what about you? You're into another.
I'm into another
Danny book.
So I have, in the next couple of months, I think there's something coming out which I'm not really allowed to talk about, but it's very dark. It's short and it's incredibly dark, and it's probably, and I like it. It still has very much my stamp on it. There is a justice to it. That comes out in the next couple of months, and then there is the next Danny, and then I'm doing various things like this. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining.
It's been lovely. It's lovely to talk with you.
And I'm hoping to see you actually in line next year.
Yes. I will definitely be there. Yeah, it's one of my favourite parts of the world anyway. It's gorgeous.
Such a beautiful place. I'll make sure you'll spot me. I'll have a Kiss Me Quick hat on. That's not a line thing, is it? That's far too red for line.
I will have a bonnet and a cape, and I'll be swishing along the undercroft or whatever it is, the under something.
Okay, thanks so much. Have a great weekend. Have a great.
All right then. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye then.
Bye-bye. Bye.